We're talking with Robert Lacey, the author of Inside the Kingdom, about the release of his book on paperback. Robert, thanks for joining us, and if you could just talk briefly about what has happened in the time since the book came out that you'd like to share in the developments in the kingdom.
Well, first, Pat, I'd like to thank you very much for all you're doing to spread the good word about Saudi Arabia, positive and negative, to give a full picture. That's what I tried to do in the book. Since the book came out, I found a lot more anxiety, because obviously time has gone by, about what's going to happen next. What happens when inevitably King Abdullah is no longer with us? There's a sort of feeling that the whole thing's going to fall apart. And I would say quite the contrary. This fails to give justice to the Saudi ability for compromise, which is particularly strong in the royal family. I've been led to think about this by what's happening in my own country. In Britain, we currently have a coalition government of conservatives and liberals. That's what they're actually called, a conservative party, liberal party. And I think you can see the very same thing in Saudi Arabia. There is obviously the liberal group with King Abdullah, but the conservatives are represented by Prince Naif, the interior minister, much feared by many people, but I think wrongly so. It was very interesting that for the recent National Day, which was a controversial matter, because a lot of the religious folk felt that a non-religious festival should not be celebrated, King Abdullah made no statement at all. But Prince Naif came out and said, we should all celebrate National Day. This godly nation was created for godly reasons. We are the country of the Quran. Let's all have a good time. It's odd for a police chief to say, let's have a good time. But they did. Everybody went out in the streets and had a wild time. And there's an example of conservative and liberal. The conservatives are backing up the liberals and saying, this sort of progress is fine. And I think that whatever happens in the future, you will see that same ability to bridge the gap, certainly in the immediate future. Of course, in the long term, some sort of democracy and participation has to come. But so long as Saudi Arabia remains a monarchy, they're very skilled at keeping their bottoms on two stools.
We also talked a little bit before about the perception in the United States about Saudi Arabia. Can you give maybe a brief extract of how you see Americans' views of Saudi Arabia compared to what you know as reality on the ground?
Well, Americans, and this is understandable, cannot get over the tragedy of 9/11 and the fact that 15 of those hijackers were Saudis. The fact that they were no more Saudi in their essence than Timothy McVeigh was American in his essence when he committed his horrible atrocity escapes people. It's just so easy to blank everything out and say all Saudis are authors of terrorism. In fact, of course, Saudi Arabia is a prime target of terrorism, and the Saudis are victims of terrorism. And Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, their avowed objective is to bring down the House of Saud and to end its friendship with America. Before that, the Saudis were victims of terrorism from the Palestinians. Let's not forget that when Saddam Hussein threatened Saudi Arabia at the time of the Gulf War, who joined with Saddam Hussein against the Saudis? Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So, you know, the Saudis were the first Islamic country to sign up for financial measures to stop terrorism. Back in September in the Millennium Conference, which was held by the United Nations to discuss what are the problems of the future facing the new century, it was King Abdullah, then Crown Prince Abdullah, who stood up and said, the big problem facing us in the future is terrorism, and we've got to tackle it. And you can now see it in Saudi Arabia. I think it's going to take another 5-10 years. But I think, for example, the arms deal that has just gone through, you can debate whether or not Saudi Arabia needs all these arms, but it's an enormous statement of America coming round to the needs of Saudi Arabia. And who would have said 5 years ago that the biggest arms deal in history would be between America and Saudi Arabia? Well, that reflects how people at the top in Saudi Arabia, the people at the top in America are thinking, and I think that's going to trickle down in due course. I certainly hope so.
Your first book was banned in Saudi Arabia. How's this one doing there? What's the perception?
Not much better. The first book was banned. It was a bestseller as a result. The Saudis are more clever now. They don't actually ban something formally, but somehow every time my publishers apply for permission to distribute, the permission is refused. So at the moment, it's still not allowed to be distributed, but there's an Arabic edition coming out this autumn, and we'll see how that fares.
Well, now that the paperback edition is out, best of luck with that. Thanks again.
Thank you, Pat, very much indeed.